on Times Radio. Now, from protests in France to the protests on the streets of London, Just Stop Oil protests briefly disturbed the Pride Parade in central London earlier today. The Metropolitan Police confirming that 7 people were arrested for public nuisance offences. Well, yesterday, LGBTQ plus members of Just Stop Oil issued a statement demanding that Pride stop accepting sponsorship from high-polluting industries and calling on them to make a statement condemning new oil and gas exploration. Well, let's speak to Emma Brown now from Just Stop Oil. Emma, hello, good evening.
Oh, hi, Darryl. Thank you for having me on.
Real pleasure. You made a statement demanding that Pride adopt a policy against the extraction of new oil and gas. That's a very specific belief about a specific policy. Isn't it unreasonable for Pride as an organisation to take that stance?
Not at all. I think Pride needs to come out against new oil and gas. I think, we need to not forget the history of Pride. Pride is a protest. And if you think about the rights that were won by the LGBTQ community, they were won through disruptive protests. So, for example, you had ACT UP in the 80s. They were a group of people that were facing a problem like AIDS, which was not being given the attention by the government because they didn't care about gay people dying. And what we're seeing now is a government that does not care about ordinary people dying due to the climate crisis, and it's not getting the attention it deserves. So I think it's perfectly reasonable for all organisations to come out against oil and gas because it's a human rights issue.
And you say that Pride is a protest, that's right, but it is a protest about gay rights, not about oil extraction.
But I think you're missing the point, Darryl. Like, if we don't stop oil exploration, people are going to die. That includes queer people, it includes people all over the world, and the climate crisis will hit first and worst and hardest marginalized communities, whether those are people in countries that have done the least to cause this crisis, places like a lot of African countries which are suffering drought right now, which have only contributed 3% to global emissions. It's not a matter, this is the most intersectional problem that we have, the climate crisis. It affects everything. Mm-hmm. So it's ridiculous to think that gay rights are a separate issue from the rights of us all to have clean air, clean water. And what we really were trying to do with this protest, with this action, was to draw attention to the fact that there is so much rainbow washing and greenwashing going on. Like, Coca-Cola is the worst plastic polluter in the world, and sticking a rainbow on a turd does not stop it being a turd, and that is what we are getting served by the governments and corporations that are screwing us all over.
Okay, you make a compelling point, turd or otherwise, Emma, and I suppose one of the things that critics may point to, though, is that Pride is already under attack. This is a difficult time for the LGBTQ plus community, quite frankly. Not just in countries where homosexuality is still legal, but here in the United Kingdom as well. Doesn't it need clarity of cause?
I really don't think so. If you look at Pits and Perverts support the miners' strikes, we are not going to get progressive social change by existing in our silos. When we target events such as Pride, because it was gay and queer people that were doing that protest, we are doing that out of love. We are doing it because we love queer culture, because we would go to Pride anyway, and we are demanding that they do better. So it's a ridiculous notion that all of our struggles exist in isolation and that we can only fight for queer rights without accepting the enormous existential threat that is coming for all of our rights if we do not address it.
Yeah, it's an interesting comparison you make, isn't it? When the gay community joined forces with a mining community who were protesting the cuts, and they fundraised for them and they worked together, and there was a great film about it, wasn't there, a couple of years ago with Bill Nye. And that is an example of two communities who are fighting for something, coming together and working together. Isn't this different, though, in so much as Just Stop Oil's protest here is not directed at the government, it's not directed at people who are marginalising gay people, it's directed at Pride specifically, the organisation?
But I would say that I'm glad that you're kind of giving me an opportunity to say that the climate movement is doing a lot of solidarity work. We are out on picket lines. We are supporting workers. We are supporting other groups that are demanding climate justice, such as housing groups, fighting for their rights, for retrofitting rather than demolishing social housing. There is lots of examples of us doing that work, which never get reported on in the media. But also I would say that you need to look at a wider spectrum. If you've seen the film Milk, there was, even in the 1970s, he was getting condemned as being too radical and too divisive because he was challenging the gay establishment and saying you need to do better.
Right.
So I don't take that argument that because people actually have been asking Pride, Fossil Free Pride, for example, has been trying to have a dialogue with Pride for 5 years about their corporate sponsorship. They haven't even replied to an email. It's actually these disruptive tactics which work at bringing people to the table, because look at how many interviews we've had discussing that now and really drawing attention to the fact that there is so much rainbow washing going on. And Pride is now a huge corporate event, just like every other organization and corporation. It has a responsibility. It has a responsibility for the values that it proposes to uphold, and we are just challenging that and calling that out.
Okay. Emma, nice to talk to you tonight. Really appreciate your insights. Emma Brown from Just Stop Oil. On that issue, there's a couple of points made about Pride there from Emma. A spokesperson from Pride earlier today said that Pride is a protest and Pride is a celebration. We're protesting for LGBTQ plus rights and our trans siblings in a separate march alone. So for us, anybody who tries to disrupt that protest and parade is really letting down those people who use this space once a year to come together to celebrate and protest for those rights. Okay. We'll in fact, we'll talk about this more after 11 o'clock tonight, actually. We're going to take a deep dive into it and asking that question with Louise Calvey, who is a gay human rights lawyer, after 11 tonight. In the meantime, we're going to